HMS Hood was the last battlecruiser built for the Royal Navy. Commissioned in 1920, she was named after the 18th-century Admiral Samuel Hood, one of 4 Admiral-class battlecruisers ordered in mid-1916. Hood had serious design limitations, though her design was drastically revised after the Battle of Jutland and improved while she was under construction. For this reason she was the only ship of her class to be completed. As one of the largest and, ostensibly, the most powerful warships in the world, Hood was the pride of the Royal Navy and, carrying immense prestige, was known as the Mighty Hood. Hood was involved in several showing the flag exercises between her commissioning in 1920 and the outbreak of war in 1939, including training exercises in the Mediterranean Sea and a circumnavigation of the globe with the Special Service Squadron in 1923 and 1924. She was attached to the Mediterranean Fleet following the outbreak of the Second Italo-Abyssinian War. When the Spanish Civil War broke out, Hood was officially assigned to the Mediterranean Fleet until she had to return to Britain in 1939 for an overhaul. By this time, advances in naval gunnery had reduced Hood's usefulness. She was scheduled to undergo a major rebuild in 1941 to correct these issues, but the outbreak of World War II in September 1939 forced the ship into service without the upgrades. When war with Germany was declared, Hood was operating in the area around Iceland, and she spent the next several months hunting between Iceland and the Norwegian Sea for German commerce raiders and blockade runners. After a brief overhaul of her propulsion system, she sailed as the flagship of Force H, and participated in the destruction of the French fleet at Mers el-Kabir. Relieved as flagship of Force H, Hood was dispatched to Scapa Flow, and operated in the area as a convoy escort and later as a defense against a potential German invasion fleet. In May 1941, she and the battleship Prince of Wales were ordered to intercept the German battleship Bismarck and the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen, which were en route to the Atlantic where they were to attack convoys. On 24 May 1941, early in the Battle of the Denmark Strait, Hood was struck by several German shells, exploded and sank. Due to her perceived invincibility, the loss had a profound effect on the British people. The Royal Navy conducted 2 inquiries into the reasons for the ship's quick demise. The first, held very quickly after the ship's loss, concluded that Hood's aft magazine had exploded after one of Bismarck's shells penetrated the ship's armor. A second inquiry was held after complaints that the First Board had failed to consider alternative explanations, such as an explosion of the ship's torpedoes. It was more thorough than the First Board and concurred with the First Board's conclusion. Despite the official explanation, some historians continued to believe that the torpedoes caused the ship's loss, while others proposed an accidental explosion inside one of the ship's gun turrets that reached down into the magazine. Other historians have concentrated on the cause of the magazine explosion. The discovery of the ship's wreck in 2001 confirmed the conclusion of both boards. Although the exact reason the magazines detonated will always be a mystery since that area of the ship was entirely destroyed in the explosion. Design and description. The Admiral-class battlecruisers were designed in response to the German Mackensen-class battlecruisers, which were reported to be more heavily armed and armoured than the latest British battlecruisers of the Renown and the Courageous classes. The design was revised after the Battle of Jutland to incorporate heavier armor and all 4 ships were laid down. Only Hood was completed, because the ships were very expensive and required labor and material that could be put to better use building merchant ships needed to replace those lost to the German U-boat campaign. Hood was significantly larger than her predecessors of the Renown class. As completed, she had an overall length of 860 feet 7 inches, a maximum beam of 104 feet 2 inches, and a draft of 32 feet at deep load. This was 110 feet longer and 14 feet wider than the older ships. She displaced 42,670 long tons at load and 46,680 long tons at deep load, over 13,000 long tons more than the older ships. The ship had a complete double bottom. Hood had a metacentric height of 4.2 feet at deep load, which minimized her roll and made her a steady gun platform. The additional armor added during construction increased her draft by about 4 feet at deep load, which reduced her freeboard and made her very wet. At full speed, or in heavy seas, water would flow over the ship's quarterdeck and often entered the mess decks and living quarters through ventilation shafts. This characteristic earned her the nickname of the largest submarine in the Navy. The persistent dampness, coupled with the ship's poor ventilation, was blamed for the high incidence of tuberculosis aboard. The ship's complement varied widely over her career. In 1919, she was authorized 1433 men as a squadron flagship. In 1934, she had 81 officers and 1244 men aboard. The propulsion system consisted of 24 Yarrow boilers, connected to Brown Curtis geared steam turbines driving 4 propellers. The battle cruiser's turbines were designed to produce 144,000 shaft horsepower, which would propel the ship at 31 knots. But during sea trials in 1920, Hood's turbines provided 151,280 shp, which allowed her to reach 32.07 knots. She carried approximately 3,895 long tons of fuel oil, which gave an estimated range of 7,500 nautical miles at 14 knots. Armament: Hood carried 8 42 caliber BL 15-inch MKI guns in hydraulically powered twin-gun turrets. The guns could depress to -5 degrees and elevate to +30 degrees. At maximum elevation, they fired a 1,920-pound shell to a maximum range of 30,180 yards. The turrets were designated A, B, X, and Y from front to rear. 120 shells were carried for each gun. Hood's secondary armament was a dozen 50 caliber BL 5.5-INC HMKI guns, each with 200 rounds. They were shipped on shielded single pivot mounts fitted along the upper deck and the forward shelter deck. This high position allowed them to be worked during heavy weather as they were less affected by waves and spray compared with the casemate mounts of earlier British capital ships. 2 of these guns on the shelter deck were temporarily replaced by QF 4-inch MKV anti-aircraft guns between 1938 and 1939. All the 5.5-INCH guns were removed during another refit in 1940. The gun fired a 82-pound shell to a maximum range of 17,770 yards. The original anti-aircraft armament consisted of 4 QF 4-inch MKV guns on single mounts. These were joined in early 1939 by 4 twin mounts for the 45 caliber QF 4-inch Mark 16 dual-purpose gun. The single guns were removed in mid-1939 and a further 3 twin Mark 19 mounts were added in early 1940. This mounting could elevate from -10 to +80 degrees. The Mk16 gun fired about 12 35-pound high-explosive shells per minute at a muzzle velocity of 2,660 feet per second. Against surface targets, it had a range of 19,850 yards and a maximum ceiling of 39,000 feet, but an effective anti-aircraft range of much less. In 1931, a pair of octuple mountings for the 40mm QF 2-pounder Mk8 gun were added on the shelter deck, abreast the funnels, and a third mount was added in 1937. These gun mounts could depress to -10 degrees and elevate to a maximum of +80 degrees. The Mk8 2-pounder gun fired a 40mm 0.91-pound shell at a muzzle velocity of 1,920 feet per second to a distance of 3,800 yards. The gun's rate of fire was approximately 96 to 98 rounds per minute. Two quadruple mountings for the 0.5-INCH Vickers Mk3 machine gun were added in 1933, with two more mountings added in 1937. These mounts could depress to -10 degrees and elevate to a maximum of +70 degrees. The machine guns fired a 1.326-ounce bullet at a muzzle velocity of 2,520 feet per second. This gave the gun a maximum range of about 5,000 yards, although its effective range was only 800 yards. To these were added 5 unrotated projectile launchers in 1940, each launcher carrying 27-inch rockets. When they detonated, the rockets shot out lengths of cable that were kept aloft by parachutes. The cable was intended to snag aircraft and draw up the small aerial mine, which would destroy the aircraft. 6 fixed 21-inch torpedo tubes were mounted on Hood, 3 on each broadside. 2 of these were submerged forward of a turret's magazine and the other 4 were above water, abaft the rear funnel. The MKIV torpedoes had a warhead of 515 pounds of TNT. They had 2 speed and range settings: 25 knots with a maximum range of 13,500 yards or 40 knots to 5,000 yards. Approximately 28 torpedoes were carried. Fire control hood was completed with 2 fire control directors. One was mounted above the conning tower, protected by an armored hood, and was fitted with a 30-foot rangefinder. The other was fitted in the spotting top above the tripod foremast and equipped with a 15-foot rangefinder. Each turret was also fitted with a 30-foot rangefinder. The secondary armament was primarily controlled by directors mounted on each side of the bridge. They were supplemented by 2 additional control positions in the foretop, which were provided with 9-foot rangefinders, fitted in 1924-25. The anti-aircraft guns were controlled by a simple, high-angle 2-meter rangefinder mounted on the aft control position, fitted in 1926-27. 3 torpedo control towers were fitted, each with a 15-foot rangefinder. 1 was on each side of the amidships control tower and the third was on the center line above the aft control position. During the 1929-31 refit, a high-angle control system Mark I director was added on the rear searchlight platform and 2 positions for 2-pounder pom-pom anti-aircraft directors were added at the rear of the spotting top. Although only 1 director was initially fitted, the 5.5-INCH control positions and their rangefinders on the spotting top were removed during the 1932 refit. In 1934, the pom-pom directors were moved to the former locations of the 5.5-INCH control positions on the spotting top, and the 9-foot rangefinders for the 5.5-INCH control positions were reinstalled on the signal platform. 2 years later, the pom-pom directors were moved to the rear corners of the bridge to get them out of the funnel gases. Another pom-pom director was added on the rear superstructure, abaft the HACS director in 1938. 2 HACS Mark III directors were added to the aft end of the signal platform the following year, and the Mark I director aft was replaced by a Mark III. During Hood's last refit in 1941, a Type 279 air warning radar and a Type 284 gunnery radar were installed. Although the Type 279 radar lacked its receiving aerial and was inoperable, protection Hood's armor scheme was originally based on that of the battlecruiser Tiger with an 8-inch waterline belt. Unlike on Tiger, the armor was angled outwards 12 degrees from the waterline to increase its relative thickness in relation to flat trajectory shells. This change increased the ship's vulnerability to plunging shells as it exposed more of the vulnerable deck armor. 5,000 long tons of armor was added to the design in late 1916, based on British experiences at the Battle of Jutland, at the cost of deeper draft and slightly decreased speed. To save construction time, this was accomplished by thickening the existing armor, rather than redesigning the entire ship. Hood's protection accounted for 33% of her displacement, a high proportion by British standards, but less than was usual in contemporary German designs. The armored belt consisted of face-hardened Krupp-cemented armor, arranged in 3 strakes. The main waterline belt was 12 inches thick between A and Y barbets and thin to 5 to 6 inches towards the ship's ends, but did not reach either the bow or the stern. The middle armor belt had a maximum thickness of 7 inches over the same length as the thickest part of the waterline armor and thin to 5 inches abreast A barbette. The upper belt was 5 inches thick amidships and extended forward to A barbette, with a short 4-inch extension aft. The gun turrets and barbets were protected by 11 to 15 inches of KC armor, except for the turret roofs, which were 5 inches thick. The decks were made of high-tensile steel. The forecastle deck ranged from 1.75 to 2 inches in thickness, while the upper deck was 2 inches thick over the magazines and 0.75 inches elsewhere. The main deck was 3 inches thick over the magazines and 1 inch elsewhere, except for the 2-inch thick slope that met the bottom of the main belt. The lower deck was 3 inches thick over the propeller shafts, 2 inches thick over the magazines and 1 inch elsewhere. The 3-inch plating on the main deck was added at a very late stage of construction, and the 4 aftermost 5.5-INCH guns and their ammunition hoists were removed in partial compensation. Live firing trials with the new 15-inch APC shell against a mock-up of Hood showed that this shell could penetrate the ship's vitals via the 7-inch middle belt and the 2-inch slope of the main deck. A proposal was made to increase the armor over the forward magazines to 5 inches and 6 inches over the rear magazines in July 1919 in response to these trials. To compensate for the additional weight, the 2 submerged torpedo tubes and the armor for the rear torpedo warheads were removed, and the armor for the aft torpedo control tower was reduced in thickness from 6 to 1.5 inches. However, the additional armor was never fitted pending further trials. As completed, Hood remained susceptible to plunging shells and bombs. The torpedo warhead armor was reinstated during the ship's 1929-31 refit. For protection against torpedoes, she was given a 7.5-FOOTD panty-torpedo bulge that ran the length of the ship between the fore and aft barbets. It was divided into an empty outer compartment and an inner compartment filled with 5 rows of watertight, crushing tubes, intended to absorb and distribute the force of an explosion. The bulge was backed by a 1.5-INCH thick torpedo bulkhead. Aircraft Hood was initially fitted with flying-off platforms mounted on top of B and X turrets, from which fairy flycatchers could launch. During her 1929-31 refit, the platform was removed from X turret and a trainable, folding catapult was installed on her quarterdeck, along with a crane to recover a seaplane. She embarked a Fairy IIIF from No. 444 flight of the Royal Air Force. During the 1932 West Indies cruise, the catapult proved to be difficult to operate in anything but a calm sea, as it was frequently awash in bad weather. The catapult and crane were removed in 1932, along with the flying-off platform on B turret. Battle cruiser or fast battleship. Although the Royal Navy always designated Hood as a battle cruiser, some modern writers such as Anthony Preston have classified her as a fast battleship, since Hood appeared to have improvements over the fast Queen Elizabeth-class battleships. On paper, Hood retained the same armament and level of protection, while being significantly faster. Around 1918, American commanders, including Vice Admiral William Sims, commander of U.S. naval forces in Europe, and Admiral Henry T. Mayo, commander of the Atlantic Fleet, became extremely impressed by Hood, which they described as a fast battleship. and they advocated that the U.S. Navy develop a fast battleship of its own. However, the U.S. continued with their established design direction. The slower but well-protected South Dakota-class battleship and the fast and lightly armored Lexington-class battlecruiser, both of which were later cancelled in accordance with the terms of the Washington Naval Treaty of 1922. Influences from Hood showed on subsequent Lexington designs, with the reduction of the main armor belt, the change to sloped armor, and the addition of 4 above-water torpedo tubes to the 4 underwater tubes of the original design. To add to the confusion, Royal Navy documents of the period often describe any battleship with a maximum speed over 24 knots as a battlecruiser, regardless of the amount of protective armor. For instance, the never-built G3 battlecruiser was classified as such, although it would have been more of a fast battleship than Hood. The scale of Hood's protection, though adequate for the Jutland era, was at best marginal against the new generation of 16-inch gun capital ships that emerged soon after her completion in 1920. Typified by the American Colorado-class and the Japanese Nagato-class battleships. The Royal Navy were fully aware that the ship's protection flaws still remained, even in her revised design. So Hood was intended for the duties of a battlecruiser, and she served in the battlecruiser squadrons through most of her career. Late in her career, Hood was outclassed by the armor and protective arrangement of World War II-era fast battleships. But few available big guns vessels could match Bismarck's speed, and in 1941 the Admiralty included Hood among the ships sent to engage the German battleship